There's something so relatable about that video to me. Something so keenly present in my life. Sometimes it comes in those like out of the blue text message convos. Maybe those are reserved for me as a former campus pastor who still gets those questions occasionally from college students who don't want to have the phone call conversation about this, but they do want you to reply in a novel of why they need Jesus, right? Simple questions to answer via text. Or perhaps it's more familiar in the kinds of conversations that we have. Maybe it's with that friend who believes in Jesus and loves God, but maybe they don't go to church very often. Maybe they feel a little guilty about it, but they know that you come to church. So they try and kind of appease that by having a conversation about God with you. There's something powerful about the kinds of simple questions we can ask about God. Our scripture this morning comes from a familiar passage in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus has just fed 5,000 people. And it picks up in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22, and it goes like this. Right then, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side of the lake while he dismissed the crowds. When he sent them away, he went up onto a mountain by himself to pray. Evening came and he was alone. Meanwhile, the boat, fighting a strong headwind, was being battered by the waves and was already far away from land. Very early in the morning, he came to the disciples walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." They were so frightened, they screamed. Then Jesus spoke to them. "Be encouraged, it's me. Don't be afraid." Peter replied, "Lord, if it's you, order me to come out onto the water." And Jesus said, "Come." Then Peter got out of the boat and was walking on the water towards Jesus. But when Peter saw the strong wind, he became frightened. As he began to sink, he shouted, "Lord, rescue me." Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him, saying, "You man of weak faith, why did you begin to have doubts?" When they got into the boat, the wind settled. Then those in the boat worshiped Jesus and said, "You must be God's Son." For the rest of August, we are in a new series called Why Bother? And we're going through 3 different questions over the course of the next 3 weeks. Why do people need Jesus? Why do people need the church? And why do people need our church? These are heavy questions. They're heavy questions that have the power to do something powerful. This is the time of year when school's getting started back up, and perhaps for a few of you, you had to go get physicals or take a student to get a physical. And these questions are kind of like our own physical examination. They are questions that we need to face head on. What does the scale say? And in it, it becomes a litmus test for where we are in our faith and what we're called to do to grow in our faith, to become healthier, to become more physically adept spiritually. It's a powerful thing to face and ask these questions because in it, they shake us out of any stupor that may have taken hold. Because I don't know about y'all, but sometimes when I go through the motions, apathy can begin to set in, and I forget why I'm going through the motions, why I come to church on Sunday morning. Well, I come because I'm a pastor, but why do you come on Sunday mornings? And asking and answering these questions for ourselves shakes out any apathy, any stupor that might have clung on unintentionally, so that we can stand proudly and boldly and face the answers to these powerful questions. And when they're asked of us, whether in overt text messages or subtle conversations or passing someone in the school hallway, we can be ready, filled with grace and love, to answer these questions. So if you've been around and if you've heard me preach before, or if you've had a chance to talk to me and get to know me, then part of my story that you've probably heard is that I grew up in a tradition where I did not believe I would ever stand here and be a pastor. And I've told this story, right, of my journey in college, of where I found God anew. I never lost God, but in it I found and heard my call more clearly in college and the time after college. But a piece of my story I often will just kind of skim through, skip over, and move past as quickly as I can is an important part of the story. Because in my freshman year of college, I reached a breaking point with the church, and I left. I left the church for over 3 years. And I did not enter those doors unless forced by parents on a Christmas Eve or an Easter morning. I did not want anything to do with the church. This summer, I had the joy to lead a junior high stay-at-home mission trip. And on one of the evenings, our activity was swimming. And we went swimming, and we did one of the games that you classically play in someone's backyard pool, where you throw out the sinking rings and you dive down to get them. We had played it 2 or 3 times at this point, and I was ready to give it a go one more time, and I discovered it was just me and one other student who wanted to play it, but I was still in. I was game to go again. But here's the thing, there were 2 of us in over 50 diving rings that we threw into exclusively the deep end of the pool. And we had managed to throw them in such a way that if you could get 2 when you'd come up, you had succeeded. And so I had gone down multiple times to the deep end and come out. And one of the times I was close enough to the edge where I kind of tossed my 2 on the side and I went straight back in. And I wasn't ready. I got to the deep and realized that I am already out of breath, and I felt the pressure of the water, and I put my feet on the bottom and I kicked back up. And I crested the gentle lapping waves of the pool. But I felt like I was Peter drowning in the crashing waves and wind around me. Those 3 years of my life, though there were good moments spiritually, I was in the sinking waters. But this is what happens. Christ immediately grabs my hand. And all I can do is to cling on to Jesus for dear life. Why do I need Jesus? Why do you need Jesus. Perhaps I can't nail the nail straight on the head for each and every one of you with just one word or one example this morning on why you need Jesus. But I know why I need Jesus. And I bet you that the answers will ring familiarly true for you as well. I need to cling to Jesus. I need to cling to Jesus in such a way that it's like tubing behind a boat, like I did last Saturday. And tubing is really like the lazy man's water sport when done properly. You know, your elbows should be up and locked in. And I hadn't been tubing since I was junior high, middle school aged. And so this is what I was doing the entire time. I was clinging onto that tube for dear life because I didn't realize that all I needed to do was this, and it'd be really comfortable and a really easy ride. And so instead, I felt like I was flying behind a boat the entire time. I was clinging on to that tube like I need to cling on to some Jesus. But no, truly, the next day was Sunday. And my hands ached. And that happened to be last Sunday. And as my hands and my arms ached, the one role I had to do as we closed out our one sermon to preach was I had to preside over communion. And my hands ached as I broke the body of Christ for y'all. And my hands trembled as I clung on to the chalice and lifted high the cup of Christ. And in that, I was reminded of why I cling, even when it hurts, to Jesus. I need to cling to Jesus, not the historical Jesus, not the moralistic, therapeutic, deistic Jesus, or in other words, that's the fancy way of just saying that if you're a nice person, then you're following Jesus' will for you. No, I need to cling to the fullness of Jesus. I need to cling to the incarnate Jesus. I need to cling to the mystery of the hypostatic union, the realization that Christ is fully human and fully divine. That's the Christ I need to cling on to. As a pastor, I am privileged to get to be in some big moments of life with people. I get to be in the feeding the 5,000 moments of people's lives, the ordinary miracles. This week, I prayed with someone the last prayer they would have prayed over them on this earthly world. This week, I prayed with a family as I held a deceased one's hand and a living one's hand. And we entrusted that person into God's care. This week, after all of our wonderfulness that is happening this Sunday morning is over, I will get into my car that is already packed out to go host a Harry Potter Hufflepuff-themed baby shower in Fort Worth, to celebrate a mama who is adopting her second child. This week, I celebrated with a lot of football players and cheerleaders and women of the community the start of a new school year. This week, I sat with my own family in a hospital room as we gathered around a loved one and we laughed as we told stories and listened and watched as she breathed heavily. This week, I did premarital counseling for a couple who will get married in November. And this week, I did counseling for a family in crisis. I need the fullness of Jesus to cling to. The Jesus who cried, who laughed and ate good food with good friends. Let's get that order right. And even got mad enough to toss some tables. I need that Jesus to cling to. Because when I experience the big fullness of life, in the biggest moments and the most ordinary moments of laying down to go to sleep in the same way I do every night, I need that Jesus to remind me that it's okay to experience any emotion and to cling to the present moment with the community gathered round. I need to cling to the fully human Jesus. Patrick and I are getting ready. We are putting down roots. Y'all are going to have more and more of a hard time getting rid of us. We are going to be moving out to Glen Lake Camp, though, where Patrick works. We're going to be living up on the cliff side, about a 5-minute hike from the cross, if you've been out there before. And my front porch looks out onto a giant field with an old oak tree and some cattle, if they're grazing nearby. And in this preparation to move, I have spent more time thinking about the ways that I will go to be on the mountain alone with my God. Just like Christ does when he dismisses the crowd and sends the disciples ahead. Because I need to cling to the fully human Jesus who remembers that it's okay to go and be alone with God. I've even spent more time thinking about the kinds of spaces that I'll retreat to in our home than the rest of the spaces, like what will our bedroom look like or our bathrooms look like. That even we have read an article that I think Patrick and I will be practicing out there, which is proven by this graphic, that the joy level of what you can do on an evening is go camping, which we can camp in our front yard. But there's something powerful for me about connecting to God in nature and letting the stars blanket over me in God's creation. I need to cling to the fully divine Jesus, so that in those moments where the waters are lapping at me, or I feel like they are a strong wind and waves crashing over me, and all of a sudden there's a moment where Jesus puts me back in the boat, that I know that all I can do with my aching body, my aching and tired arms from clinging on to that hand, is to turn around and worship the Son of God. Why do you need Jesus? Why do people need Jesus? Everybody needs Jesus. We all need to cling to Jesus when the days are ceaseless and we needed to be reminded to rest. We need Jesus when the miracles come in our lives, and we need Jesus when the waves in life are coming, even if we have our church family. And all we can do is hold on to that hand that's been extended to us through whatever financial troubles, whatever family crisis, whatever death or grief comes our way, whatever days that are just too much, whether because of work or family or our own selves. We need to cling to Jesus, because in clinging to Jesus, we see the clearest picture of God's love for each of us. So why bother? It's a heavy question to ask. Why do people need Jesus? If something has hit home for you or something is stirring within your soul, then my invitation for you this week is to answer that question for yourself. Why do people need Jesus? Why do you need Jesus? And in the answering of that question, you'll find at least a piece of your story. Or if you want to go real old school, you'll find a piece of your testimony in that answer. And what I would encourage you to do as you answer that question for yourself is to share it with the person who has perhaps grown a little apathetic, perhaps has been slumbered into a stupor of their faith. So that if you get the text or the calm question, you can answer, why do I need Jesus? Amen.